The sky was painted with fire. Warships burned as they fell from the clouds, their broken metal crashing against the barren ground. The battlefield was filled with smoke, dust, and the cries of warriors who refused to surrender. Among them stood Rena, a tall warrior from the proud Kale race. Her armor was scratched and broken, her blade chipped, but her spirit was unbroken. For days, her people had fought against an enemy far greater in number. The invaders came like a storm, wave after wave, with machines that tore through defenses and ships that blotted out the stars. The Kale had once been strong, a race known for discipline and courage. But now, Rena looked around and saw only ruins. Towers of her city lay in pieces, the fleet was scattered, and the voices of her commanders had gone silent. Still, she refused to fall back. She raised her blade high, shouting a cry of defiance. The enemy charged, and she met them head-on. Each swing of her weapon was heavy with exhaustion, yet precise, honed by years of training. She struck down one foe, then another, her movements a dance of survival. But the more she fought, the clearer it became this battle was lost. A sharp blast struck her side, sending her crashing to the ground. Her vision blurred. Her breaths came ragged, and pain surged through her body. She tried to rise, but her strength failed. Around her, the battlefield echoed with the clash of weapons and the roar of ships. Dust and smoke covered the sun, leaving the world in a dim red glow. Rena's mind drifted as she lay there. Memories of her people flashed before her eyes. She saw the training halls where she had first learned to wield a blade, the proud faces of her comrades standing in formation, the promise she had made to fight for her people's honor. All of it now seemed so distant. This is the end, she thought. A warrior's life was meant to end in battle, but she had always believed her fight would mean something more. Now, lying on the cold ground, she felt only silence creeping, and her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She reached for her blade, still lying close to her hand, and held it weakly across her chest. If this was her last moment, she would hold it with pride. Her lips whispered a final vow, a quiet promise to her ancestors that she had fought until her last breath. The sounds of battle grew faint. The world around her faded into shadow, as if the smoke itself was swallowing her whole. Her eyes closed slowly, heavy with the weight of defeat. She accepted it, but before the darkness could fully claim her, something strange reached her senses. A sound soft, steady, unlike the harsh roar of war. Footsteps, careful yet strong, drew near. She wanted to open her eyes, to see who or what approached, but her body refused to move. A voice spoke, low and firm. Though the words blurred in her ears, she could not understand them at first. But she felt no threat in the tone. Instead, there was urgency, almost concern. Hands touched her armor, searching carefully as if trying not to cause more harm. Rena's pride stirred for a brief moment. She was Kale, a warrior. She did not need saving. Yet the weakness in her limbs betrayed her, and she could only let the stranger act. Her body was lifted, heavy but secure, carried across uneven ground. She felt the shift of weight, the strength of arms that held her, and the steady rhythm of breathing near her own. It was strange, different from the harsh grip of a soldier dragging a fallen comrade. This was careful, deliberate, almost protective. The last thing she remembered before losing full awareness was the faint scent of earth, smoke, and something unfamiliar yet steady. Then the darkness returned, deep and final. Rena believed she had taken her last breath. She believed her story had ended on the battlefield, her honor sealed with her fall. But destiny had chosen another path. When Rena opened her eyes, the world was silent. No roar of warships, no clash of blades, no cries of soldiers. Instead, she heard only the crackle of firewood and the soft whistle of wind against stone walls. She blinked slowly, her vision blurry. At first, then clearing to reveal a small shelter made of metal and stone. Her body felt heavy, but the sharp pain of battle had lessened. Bandages covered her wounds, and she realized someone had cleaned and treated them. Her armor, broken and scorched, rested beside her on the ground. She touched her chest and found her blade there too, carefully placed within reach. Confusion filled her mind. She remembered the battlefield, the burning skies. The moment she thought her breath had ended. But this place was not death, nor the halls of her ancestors. She had been saved. By whom? A sound came from the other side of the shelter. Rena turned her head and saw a figure kneeling near the fire. It was a human. The human wore simple clothing, patched in places, showing signs of long use. His hair was dark, his face marked with lines of work and hardship. He moved with quiet focus, stirring something in a pot above the fire. When he turned his head, his eyes met hers. "You are awake," he said calmly. Rena stiffened. Though she understood his words, her pride resisted. Her people had called humans reckless wanderers, fragile beings who often stumbled into places they did not belong. Yet this one had not only found her but cared for her. "Why?" she asked, her voice weak but steady. "Why save me?" The man rose and walked closer. He carried no weapon in his hands, only a cup of water. He knelt beside her, offering it without hesitation. "Because you were dying," he answered simply, "and I could not leave you there." Rena stared at him, her warrior's mind turning. "You are human," she said. "Yes," he replied. "My name is Mark. I live here, away from the cities." She did not take the cup at first. Accepting help felt like weakness. Yet her throat burned with dryness. Finally, she reached out, her hand trembling, and drank. The water was cool and sharp, easing her pain. "Your people," she began, but stopped herself. She wanted to ask if he knew of the battle, if he had seen the fall of her fleet. Yet the calm in his eyes told her he was not a soldier. He was something else, perhaps a settler, one who survived on the edge of unknown worlds. "You fought a great war," Mark said, as if reading her thoughts. "I saw the ships fall. The land shook from the battles. I thought all were gone. But then I found you." Rena closed her eyes for a moment. The weight of his words pressed upon her. Yes, her people had been crushed. She was likely the last. Alive in this place. To be saved by a human of all beings was a twist of fate she could not understand. "You should not have," she whispered. "You risked your life for an enemy." Mark shook his head. "Enemy? I saw only someone wounded. Someone who needed help. That is enough." The simplicity of his answer unsettled her. Among the Kale, enemies were to be destroyed, not saved. Yet here was this man, calm and certain, who had carried her from the battlefield and cared for her. Wounds without asking anything in return. Silence filled the shelter for a time. The fire popped softly, and outside the wind carried the distant cry of a bird. Rena studied Mark carefully. His hands were strong, marked by labor, not battle. His face held no fear, only steady determination. She wondered how a being so ordinary could stand so firm in the shadow of war. At last, she spoke again. "You could have taken my blade, my armor, my life, but you did not." Mark looked at her weapon where it lay beside her. "That blade is yours," he said. "I kept it close because I thought you would want it. I do not need it. I have my own ways to survive." Something stirred within Rena's chest, a feeling she had not expected. Respect. Not for strength in battle, but for honor in action. She looked away, unwilling to show her thoughts. Her body ached as she tried to sit up. But Mark raised a hand gently. "Rest," he said. "Your wounds are not ready for strain. You must heal." "I am a warrior," she said firmly, though her voice trembled. "I do not lie still while others fight." Mark did not argue harshly. He simply nodded. "I know, but even warriors must breathe before they can rise again." His words lingered in her mind. They carried no command, only truth. And though her pride resisted, her body agreed. She lay back once more, staring at the ceiling of the shelter. For the first time since the fall of her people, she felt a strange calm. Not victory, not pride, but something gentler. Safety. As her eyes grew heavy again, she thought of this human named Mark, a being her people had called fragile. Yet in her darkest hour, it was his strength that had saved her. And though she did not yet admit it aloud, Rena knew this meeting was the beginning of something she could not yet name. Days passed in the small shelter, and Rena's body began to recover. The wounds were still deep, but her Kale blood healed faster than most. Each morning she opened her eyes to see Mark tending the fire, repairing tools, or bringing food from his hunts. He spoke little, but his actions were steady, always leaving food and water within her reach. At first, Rena accepted the care in silence, but as her strength grew, her pride returned. She was Kale, born to fight, not to lie still while another carried her burden. The thought of needing a human's help cut deep into her spirit. One morning, she tried to rise fully. Her legs trembled, her side ached, but she forced herself up. Mark noticed at once. "You should rest," he said calmly, without looking up from sharpening his knife. "I have rested enough," she replied firmly. "I will not be weak any longer." Her voice carried the tone of a commander, sharp and commanding. She tried to walk, but her knees buckled, and she stumbled against the wall. Mark moved quickly, catching her before she could fall. His hands were steady, but his voice remained calm. "You are not weak," he said. "You are healing." "That is different." Rena pushed his hands away, anger flashing in her eyes. "You do not understand. A Kale warrior does not lie down while others fight. I should have died on the battlefield, blade in hand, not here, hidden in a shelter." Mark set his knife aside and faced her directly. His expression did not change, but his eyes met hers without fear. "You are alive. That means you still have a choice. Dying in the dirt would have ended everything. Living gives you more battles to fight." His words struck her like an unexpected blow. Among her people, death in combat was considered the highest honor. To live after defeat often carried shame. Yet this human spoke as if survival itself was a kind of strength. "You speak as if life is more important than honor," Rena said bitterly. Mark shook his head. "I did not separate them. To live, even after loss, is its own honor. Because living means you can still protect something. You can still choose what comes next." The firelight flickered between them, casting long shadows across the walls. Rena's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to crush his simple logic with the weight of her people's traditions. But something in his voice, calm, unwavering, held her still. She turned away, ashamed of her weakness. "You know nothing of the Kale," she said quietly. "That may be true," Mark admitted. "But I know something of struggle. I have lived on worlds that tried to kill me every day. I have seen people fall, and I have seen them rise again. Honor is not only in the death you choose. Sometimes it is in the life you keep." Rena's hands clenched into fists. The part of her that still clung to Kale pride wanted to reject his words. Yet the part of her that remembered the battlefield, the crushing defeat, the silence of her people, felt the truth in them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the pop of firewood. Finally, Rena broke the silence. "You risked much to save me. Why? What am I to you?" Mark looked at her directly. "You are someone who needed help. That is reason enough." The simplicity of his answer unsettled her more than any speech of glory or courage. Among the Kale, every action was tied to honor, to rank, to duty. Yet this man acted without asking for reward or recognition. He simply did what he believed was right. Her heart struggled between anger and respect. She did not want to admit weakness before him, yet she could not ignore the strength he showed in his own way. The next day, Rena tried again to stand, slower this time. Mark did not stop her but stood nearby, ready if she fell. She managed to walk a few steps before pain forced her to sit. Sweat ran down her brow, and her breathing was heavy, but her eyes burned with determination. "You see," she said, her pride flaring, "I will rise again." Mark gave a small nod. "I never doubted it." His calm acceptance disarmed her more than opposition would have. She stared at him, trying to find arrogance in his tone, but there was none, only quiet certainty. That night, as she lay awake, Rena thought deeply. She had seen many warriors in her life, strong and fierce, yet few with the quiet strength this human showed. He did not boast, he did not demand, yet his presence carried a weight that even she a Kale warrior, could not ignore. For the first time, Rena began to wonder if humans were more than her people had believed. Fragile, yes, but perhaps their strength was hidden in a different form. The clash between her pride and his calm words was far from over, but in that clash, a new respect was beginning to take shape. The days stretched into weeks, and Rena's body grew stronger. Her wounds closed. Her steps grew steady, and her warrior spirit burned brighter with each passing sunrise. Yet though her strength returned, she found her thoughts often drifting to the strange human who had saved her life. Mark lived with quiet discipline. Every morning he rose with the sun, checked the traps he had set in the forest, gathered water, and tended to the small shelter. He spoke little, but his hands were always busy, shaping wood into tools, mending cloth, or cleaning the fire pit. To Rena, it was unlike the Kale way of training and ceremony. Yet there was something in his routine that reminded her of the discipline of soldiers. One morning, as she watched him repair a broken spear he used for hunting, she spoke. "You live like a warrior, though you claim not to be one." Mark glanced up briefly. "I live to survive." "That is different. Survival," Rena said, tilting her head, "is the heart of every battle. You fight in your own way, with traps and tools instead of blades." Mark gave a small smile but did not answer. Later that day, when he returned from the forest with 2 rabbits, Rena insisted on helping. Though her steps were still stiff, she demanded he show her how to prepare the animals. At first he hesitated, worried she might strain herself. But her determined eyes left no room for argument. So he taught her. With patience, he showed her how to clean and cook the catch. His hands moved with steady precision, and Rena studied each motion. To her surprise, the task carried a kind of honor. Not the honor of battle, but of care, ensuring nothing was wasted, that life given was respected. That night, as they ate together, Rena spoke quietly. "Among my people, the hunt was sacred, yet I never learned it. I was trained only for war." Mark nodded. "War takes much. Survival teaches differently. Out here, every skill matters, no matter how small." Rena looked into the fire. She realized that, in a strange way, this human was teaching her lessons her own people had ignored. In return, she offered something of her own. The next morning, she called him outside. Her body was strong enough now to move with some ease, and she carried her blade once more. "Show me your stance," she said firmly. Mark frowned. "I am no soldier." "Then you must learn from one," Rena replied. She guided him to hold a long stick like a blade. With sharp eyes, she corrected his grip, his footing, and his guard. She moved slowly at first, demonstrating each strike. Mark followed her steps, awkward but willing. His movements lacked polish, yet his determination reminded her of young Kale trainees. "You learn quickly," she admitted. Mark gave a small laugh. "I learn because my teacher does not let me fail." Her pride stirred at his words, though not in the way she expected. Training him reminded her of the halls of her people, of young warriors shouting battle cries as they learned to fight. The memory was painful, yet it also gave her purpose again. In the evenings, they shared stories. Rena spoke of the Kale's traditions, how warriors swore oaths before their ancestors, how victory songs filled the skies after battle. Her voice carried both pride and sorrow as she remembered the faces of comrades she would never see again. Mark listened without judgment. When she fell silent, he spoke of his own people, not of fleets or armies, but of settlers who braved wild worlds with only their hands and their will. He told her of storms that tore homes apart, of nights spent under open skies with nothing but fire for warmth, of friends who survived by sharing everything they had. "Your people fight wars with armies," he said. "Mine fight wars with hunger, storms, and the land itself. Different battles, but battles all the same." Rena considered his words long after he spoke them. Perhaps humans were not as weak as her people had believed. Their strength was not in weapons alone, but in endurance, in finding ways to live even when the world turned against them. One evening, as the fire burned low, Rena studied Mark's face. "Your way is strange to me," she admitted, "but there is strength in it. You fight without blades, yet you still endure. That is a kind of honor. Mark looked at her with calm eyes. And your way teaches me, you remind me that survival is not only about living day by day, it is also about holding to something greater, about remembering who you are. For the first time since the fall of her people, Rena felt something she thought she had lost hope. Not hope of her people's return, but hope that her strength, her lessons, and even her pride still had meaning. And now, she shared that meaning with someone she had once called an outsider. As the night deepened, silence fell between them. But it was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of companions who had begun to walk the same path, learning from each other, each carrying a piece of the other's strength. The world around the shelter had grown calm. Days of quiet work and shared lessons made it easy for Rena to almost forget the chaos of battle. She walked further each morning, stretching her legs, testing her strength. Mark continued his steady routine, hunting, gathering, and watching the land as if he always expected danger. That danger soon arrived. It began with a sound in the distance, slow engines humming across the sky. Rena looked up sharply, her warrior's senses alert. A ship cut through the clouds, its hull scarred and patched with stolen metal. It bore no banner of honor, no markings of a true fleet. Rena recognized it at once. Scavengers, she whispered. Mark narrowed his eyes, following the ship as it descended toward the ruins of the battlefield. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. They come to take what is left, Rena explained. They feed on the dead, steal from the fallen, and strike at the weak. They are without honor. Mark gave a small nod. Then we must prepare. For the next hours, they worked side by side. Rena, though not yet at full strength, sharpened her blade and checked her armor. Mark walked the ground round the shelter, setting traps with quiet skill. He dug narrow pits, placed sharp stakes, and wove wires between stones. His methods were simple but clever, designed not to overpower but to outthink. Rena watched him with growing respect. Your hands build weapons without steel. Your mind makes the land itself fight for you. Mark gave a faint smile. Out here, you use what you have. If you cannot match strength, you use patience. Her pride wanted to scoff, yet she could not. She saw the wisdom in his actions. Among the Kale, battles were fought face to face, honor against honor. But here, on this lonely world, survival demanded a different kind of war. By nightfall, the scavengers landed near the ruins. Rena and Mark watched from the shelter's edge. Figures moved under the moonlight, dragging broken metal, stripping weapons from the dead, and shouting to one another. Their voices carried no discipline, only greed. They will search further. Rena said grimly, when they see smoke or find tracks, they will come here. Mark's expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp. Then we will be ready. The next day proved her words true. A small band of scavengers broke from the main group, following trails through the forest. Rena and Mark watched as they crept closer. Her warrior heart burned. She wanted to march out and meet them blade to blade, to cut them down for their dishonor. But her body, though healed, still lacked its full strength. She could not risk facing them all at once. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. Let them come. The ground is waiting. So they waited in silence. The scavengers stepped into the hidden wires. A snap echoed, and one fell into a pit. The others cursed, rushing forward, only to be struck by stones that Mark had rigged to fall. Confusion spread among them as the forest itself seemed to resist. Rena's blood stirred. This was not the Kale way, but it was war all the same. When one scavenger stumbled near the shelter, she rose with her blade. Her strike was swift, cutting the air, her warrior training flowing through every motion. The scavenger fell, and for a moment, the old fire of battle returned to her heart. The rest fled, shouting to their comrades. The traps had done their work. For now, the shelter remained safe. As the sun set, Rena and Mark stood together at the edge of the forest. The ground bore signs of struggle, but the danger had passed. You fought well, Mark said quietly. Rena looked at him, breathing hard, her blade still in hand. We fought well, she corrected. For the first time, She did not see his traps and tricks as weakness. They were a different kind of strength. His way of fighting lacked the glory songs of her people, but it carried results. And in this place, results meant survival. That night, as the fire crackled, Rena spoke softly. Perhaps my people were wrong about yours. You are not weak. You are not reckless. You are different and strong in your own way. Mark did not smile, but his eyes softened. And you are not alone in this fight. Her pride remained. But something new had taken root beside it, trust. Yet both knew the scavengers would not give up easily. Shadows had only begun to gather on the horizon. Greater tests still waited. The morning air was sharp and cold. Smoke from the small fire still drifted into the sky. But Rena and Mark had little time for rest. Scavengers had returned, this time in larger numbers. The forest and the ruins echoed with the faint hum of their engines and the heavy stomp of boots on dirt. Rena flexed her fingers around her blade, feeling its weight as a part of her again. Her body had healed enough to fight, but she knew this battle would require more than her strength. Mark had prepared the ground carefully, but even the best traps could not handle every threat. They come for the ruins, Rena said quietly, her eyes scanning the distant shadows. They do not care for honor, only for loot, Mark nodded, already moving toward the traps he had set earlier. Then we will stop them, together. As the first wave of scavengers entered the clearing, Rena stepped forward. Her movements were precise and fluid, each strike of her blade cut through the nearest enemy. Her Kale training making her deadly even after weeks of recovery. The scavengers faltered, surprised by her sudden attack. Meanwhile, Mark's traps were working perfectly. A net would fall over one. A hidden pit would swallow another. Stones rolled down carefully ranged slopes, scattering the intruders. Rena watched, impressed by his strategy. Strength came in many forms, she realized. Some were physical, others were clever and unseen. One scavenger broke through a trap and charged at Mark with a crude weapon. Rena reacted instantly. She met the enemy's swing with her blade, parrying and then striking with precision. The man fell before he could strike again. Mark looked at her with quiet respect. You fight well, he said. You survive well, she replied. Their teamwork grew naturally. Rena would push forward, drawing the enemies into the traps Mark had set. Mark would follow, striking with clever tools and timing, ensuring no enemy reached them unchallenged. For the first time, Rena realized that humans were not weak, and perhaps they were even stronger in ways the Kale had never considered. The battle raged for hours. Rena's muscles ached, and her breathing grew heavier. But she did not falter. She moved like a storm, sharp and controlled, her blade cutting paths through the scavengers. Mark never stopped, always setting traps, redirecting enemies, and using his environment to their advantage. At one point, a scavenger managed to sneak behind them. Mark had positioned himself with his back to the forest, so when the enemy came close, Rena's sharp eyes caught the movement. She turned swiftly, her blade striking true. The enemy fell, unable to challenge her speed and precision, when the last of the scavengers fled, leaving broken machines and scattered tools behind. Rena and Mark stood together, breathing heavily but unbroken. The forest was silent once more, save for the wind and the crackle of fire. Rena looked at Mark, feeling a mix of exhaustion and awe. We did it, she said softly. We did it together. Mark corrected. She nodded, realizing the truth of his words. Strength alone had not won the day. Strategy, endurance, and cooperation had all played their part. Her Kale pride remained, but now it had a new layer of respect for the human standing beside her. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Rena cleaned her blade and sat near the fire. Her thoughts wandered to the past, to her people, and to the battles she had fought alone. She had survived when others had fallen, not just by her own hand, but because she had allowed herself to trust. Mark prepared a simple meal of roasted meat and roots, offering her the first portion. She accepted it, grateful not only for the food but for the companionship. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel the crushing weight of loss alone. You were afraid once, Mark said quietly, sitting beside her. Rena's eyes met his. Yes, she admitted. But fear is not weakness. It teaches you to survive. And courage? He asked. Rena smiled faintly. Courage is facing what scares you, even when your body wants to give up. Mark nodded. Then today, you have shown both, and so have I. The firelight flickered over their faces, illuminating the bond that had formed between warrior and human. They were different in every way, yet together, they had faced a threat far larger than either could have managed alone. The battle had not only tested their strength, but their trust, their patience, and their willingness to adapt. Rena realized that she was beginning to see humans in a new light. Perhaps their world was not built on honor and tradition alone, as the Kale believed. Perhaps true strength was also in survival, in care, and in fighting together. The night grew still, and the stars appeared, scattered across the sky like distant fires. Rena and Mark remained near the fire, side by side, ready for whatever shadows might rise again. For the first time since her people had fallen, Rena felt that her journey had not ended with her last breath. It had only just begun. The morning air was calm, the ruins around the shelter quiet after the recent battle. Rena stood at the edge of the clearing, her blade in hand, but her posture was different now. She was no longer the desperate warrior who had fallen on the battlefield. She had survived, healed, and learned that strength came in more forms than one. Mark approached, carrying water and food. His expression was calm, but his eyes held the respect that had grown between them over weeks of survival, training, and shared battles. You are ready to leave the forest, he said softly. Setting down the supplies. Rena studied him. I am ready to decide my path, she said. Her voice carried confidence, not anger or pride, but certainty. Mark nodded. And what path will you choose? She looked around at the ruins, the traps Mark had built, the signs of survival all around her. Her people's ships had fallen, their cities destroyed, and the Kale tradition she had once held sacred seemed distant. Yet she did not feel sorrow now. Instead, she felt something new, possibility. My people are gone, she said quietly, but I can carry their honor in another way, not in endless war, but in protecting what remains, protecting life. Mark smiled faintly. Then you will not be alone. Rena took a deep breath and sheathed her blade. The Kale way had always been to fight until the last breath, but she now understood another form of strength. Trust, care, and cooperation were not weakness, they were power. Humans survived because they adapted, because they valued life, and because they learned to fight together. I will stay, she said finally, with you. I will learn more of your ways, and I will teach you some of mine. Together, we can protect this place. Mark nodded again, relief and quiet pride in his eyes. Then we begin anew. Over the next days, Rena and Mark worked side by side, rebuilding the shelter, reinforcing defenses, and hunting together. Rena showed Mark techniques of Kale combat, while Mark taught her clever strategies for survival, traps, and resource gathering. They shared stories, meals, and quiet moments beside the fire. A bond had formed that went beyond teacher and student, beyond warrior and human. Rena often thought of her fallen comrades and the fleet destroyed in the war. She felt their absence deeply, but she did not let it weigh her down. Instead, she honored them through action, through protecting the life she still had and the companion who had given her a second chance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in red and gold, Rena stood on a small hill near the shelter. She watched the stars begin to appear, familiar patterns that reminded her of Kale traditions and distant worlds. You have changed, Mark said quietly. Joining her, Rena turned to him, a faint smile on her face. And so have you? I once believed humans were fragile, reckless, and weak. But I see now that your strength comes in ways my people never understood. You endure, adapt, and protect. You fight not for glory, but for life itself. That is worth respect. Mark looked at her with calm eyes, and I see that warriors carry more than blades. They carry courage, honor, and the will to survive. You taught me that, for a long moment. They stood in silence, watching the stars together. Rena realized that she no longer feared being a survivor instead of a fallen hero. Her life had been saved not only by Mark's hands, but by the example he had set. Courage and strength were not measured only by victory in battle, but by the choices made afterward. The night grew deeper, yet neither of them felt the chill. They returned to the shelter, side by side, ready to face whatever the world might bring. The scavengers were gone, but more challenges could come, and they would face them together. Rena finally understood that her last breath on the battlefield had not been the end. It had been a beginning, a chance to see another world, another form of strength, and another kind of honor. She no longer saw humans as fragile beings. She saw them as warriors in their own right, and she no longer feared the loss of her people, for their spirit lived on in her actions, in the lessons she shared, and in the companionship she had found with Mark. As the fire crackled and the stars shone bright above, Rena felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had survived, learned, and found trust in a world that had once seemed cruel and empty. Her story had not ended with the battlefield. It had only begun, again stronger, wiser, and guided by a bond that crossed worlds. Rena took a deep breath and looked at Mark. "We have a long path ahead," she said. Mark nodded. "And we will walk it together." Together, they turned toward the horizon, ready to face the future. For Rena, her last breath had not been the end of her life. It had been the start of a new journey, one filled with hope, strength, and the unbreakable will of humanity.